The Kobayashi Maru, Starfleet's greatest test. Every single Starfleet cadet who hopes to become a captain one day has to take the test at least once. A test that will separate simply the good Starfleet officers from those who are born to command, to find out who represents the very best of what the Federation has to offer. Or is it simply just a load of crap that really is just there to f with you? Because heaven knows that Starfleet loves to screw with people. Like, a lot.
I know that a challenge like this might seem extreme, even inhumane.
But in all seriousness, the Kobayashi Maru is one of the most treasured parts of Star Trek's history, both within the universe and without it. Something that many Trek fans point to as a clear representation of the values that Starfleet hopes to engender. But what exactly are the values that the Kobayashi Maru is meant to teach? And what can we, and more importantly, leaders today, take away from that fabled test? And what does the Kobayashi Maru teach us about humanity? And also, is it even ethical? Because ethicality is certainly another thing that Starfleet tends to get all wishy-washy about.
Even inhumane.
The Kobayashi Maru scenario frequently wreaks havoc with students and equipment.
The Kobayashi Maru is, at least on its face, a rather simple test. A cadet takes on the role of captain with several instructors or other cadets taking on the roles of the rest of the bridge crew in a simulated scenario. The young captain is then tasked with patrolling a border with a hostile enemy, most often portrayed as the Klingons. On what seems like a normal patrol mission, the ship suddenly gets a distress signal from another ship in need, the Kobayashi Maru.
Captain, I'm getting something on the distress channel.
On speakers.
Imperative. This is the Kobayashi Maru.
Of course, it's every Starfleet officer's duty to respond to a distress call, especially from a Federation ship like the Maru. But there's one problem. The Maru has drifted to the wrong side of the border. Scans will tell a captain that there is no enemy ships around, but to risk crossing means breaking an already threadbare treaty. The only thing keeping full-out war from breaking out and potentially millions of lives from perishing. But those are potential lives, and this is a ship dying right in front of you as the captain, when you have the power to help. So what do? Certainly you could obey the letter of the law and ignore the distress call, leaving the Maru to their fate. But could you live with that many deaths as a result of your decision? Indeed, most cadets choose to go in. I mean, there are no other ships around, right? Perhaps this will be like a kid sneaking cookies from a cookie jar, and no one will be any the wiser. But as soon as you approach the ship, 3 Klingon birds of prey decloak, ready for a fight that your one simple ship cannot win. And here's where the hard part kicks in. You could surrender, leaving your crew open to a notoriously unfair Klingon court and even death sentence, or they could just straight up kill you in a fight with your shields down. You could try to run away, leaving yourself open to attack and the poor stranded crew of the Maru to their fate. Or you could fight the Klingons to try and save your ship as well as the Maru, though that usually results in the Maru blowing up anyways and you igniting a diplomatic incident, and you also probably dying anyways. As a friend of mine and a writer for How Stuff Works, Mark Mancini, points out in his article, the Kobayashi Maru represents a form of the trolley problem, a moral paradox first proposed by Philippa Foot in her 1967 paper, Abortion and the Doctrine of Double Effect, and later expanded on by Judith Jarvis Thomas. The problem goes kinda like this, though there are many different variations. You are in a trolley merrily going on its way, but you see ahead of you that 5 people are tied to the tracks that you're on, and that you are about to roll over them, killing them. If you do nothing, they will all surely die. You can switch the trolley to go on to another track, but you see that on those tracks, 1 person is tied to the track. So if you switch to that track, then that 1 person will die, and you will have made the choice to kill him. You have become an active agent in his death. But if you let the trolley keep going, 5 people will die, but it wasn't really the result of your decision. Someone else put them there, and the trolley wasn't started by you. And so what do you do in that situation? There's no real direct answer. And would your answer change if we changed up a little bit of the scenario? Like, for example, if the 1 person tied to the track on the side that you'd have to switch to, what if that person was an old man with terminal cancer? Does that make it better for him to kill? What if the 5 people have terminal cancer, and the 1 person is a young pregnant woman? Does it make a difference then? Will you rather kill the 5 people with terminal cancer and the 1 woman who is pregnant? What is more ethical? What is more right? Now, this is a question that philosophers still debate to this day, and there's no real answer to it. But this isn't about Kantian philosophy, this is about the Kobayashi Maru. And honestly, the answer to the question isn't really important. The only thing that's important about the Maru is the question itself. What do you do? You see, the Kobayashi Maru really isn't about a philosophical test made to make you question your ethics. It's a test designed to put you in a real-life scenario and make you understand that there are consequences. The Maru was first introduced in Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, where we see it firsthand when the young Vulcan cadet Saavik, played in that movie by the wonderful Kirstie Alley, takes the test and ultimately gets her entire crew killed. Afterwards, Saavik remains frustrated, believing the test an unfair showcase of her abilities as a commander.
I don't believe this was a fair test of my command abilities.
And why not?
Because there was no way to win.
A no-win situation is a possibility every commander may face. Has that never occurred to you?
No, sir. It is not.
How we deal with death is at least as important as how we deal with life, wouldn't you say?
Admiral Kirk's response illuminates that the test was never about winning. It was about facing death, something that every commander must face at some point. But this seems rather hypocritical, honestly, coming from Kirk. We learn that Captain Kirk himself was the only Starfleet cadet to ever beat the test, and he only was able to do that because he cheated by reprogramming the test to allow for a way to succeed in saving both the Maru and his ship.
I reprogrammed the simulation so it was possible to rescue the ship.
What?
He cheated. Changed the conditions of the test. Got a commendation for original thinking.
He did this because Kirk never believed in the no-win scenario. Yet perhaps the biggest misconception about the test goes more to the mythos surrounding Captain Kirk's solution to the problem, that there is always a way out of a no-win scenario, even if it involves cheating. Starfleet itself, as well as many Trek fans, praise Kirk's ingenious solution to the test, but by doing so, he robbed himself of an important lesson, that there are some situations where you just can't get away unscathed.
I don't like to lose.
Then you never faced that situation. Faced death.
I don't believe in the no-win scenario.
The entirety of Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan's plot is actually a rejection of Kirk's disbelief in a no-win scenario. Kirk must later face off against Khan, and Kirk believes that the only way he can succeed is if he doesn't allow himself to believe he can lose. And certainly this mindset allows him and other people to continually stay motivated and innovative in a situation, to keep pushing oneself to find a clever way out, to never give up. While Kirk's unwillingness to accept defeat allows him to continually push himself in the most desperate of situations, it also makes him unwilling to sacrifice anything in the name of winning. Fans often forget that Kirk was only able to beat Khan because Spock sacrificed his life for the Enterprise crew. This perhaps would not have been a choice that Kirk would have made, the giving up of his best friend's life, because it would mean that he had to admit that there were some victories that cannot be universal. Spock himself states that his sacrifice was his own solution to the Kobayashi Maru, that he died to save others, and that is what he chose to do.
I never took the Kobayashi Maru test. Until now. What do you think of my solution?
As Spock himself famously put it, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, or the one. Yet to Kirk, even this sacrifice was something he ultimately couldn't accept, going to great lengths to rescue his friend even from death in the subsequent movies. You see, the genius of the Kobayashi Maru test isn't about what choice you make, it's that you must make a choice. Spock chose to give his life, but others could have chosen to run, and others still decided not to do anything at all. But they all still chose to do something. And this is something that Kirk steadfastly refused to do. Over and over and over again, Kirk refused to accept any consequences for his actions, that he had to make a choice that may not be perfect. And he almost always gets what he wants throughout Star Trek. Hell, even the lengths he goes to save Spock are ultimately shown to have little consequence. Certainly Kirk loses his admiralty for his choices, but that was something he wanted anyways, to become a captain again. And it was clearly intended as a political slap on the wrist, but a real reward for his heroics. Consistently, Kirk's lack of ability to face the music is celebrated both within the universe and by Trek fans outside of it. But is that really something we should accept in a leader? Someone who makes choices without believing that those choices can cost people anything? And perhaps the answer to that question lies in how one approaches those moments. In J.J. Abrams' 2009 reboot film, Star Trek, a young alternative universe version of Kirk, played by Chris Pine, arrogantly takes the test. And unlike his Shatner counterpart, who at least seemed to approach the test with respect while still subverting it, Pine's Kirk shows active disregard for the very concept of the test, showcasing that version of the character's hubris and indifference to the test's intentions for a cadet to feel fear in the face of certain death. Here in this story, the test is not used to highlight Kirk's inventiveness in the face of a no-win scenario, but to show that sometimes a leader must admit that they will not always able to win, and be humbled by that. Something that Pine's version of Kirk was completely unable to do at that point in the story due to his own sense of self-importance.
I don't think you like the fact that I beat your test.
Furthermore, you have failed to divine the purpose of the test.
Enlighten me again.
The purpose is to experience fear. Fear in the face of certain death. To accept that fear and maintain control of oneself and one's crew. This is a quality expected in every Starfleet captain.
And perhaps this distinct difference in perspective on the same test is why Pine's Kirk received academic probation, where Shatner's Kirk was given a commendation for the exact same act. How one approaches the test, with humility or hubris, greatly affects the intended lesson, even if the outcome of the test is exactly the same, because again, it is not about the result, but what one takes away from the test that is important. The two distinct versions of Kirk put into stark relief how much the Kobayashi Maru is not at all about a test of technical skills, but a test of character. It is also perhaps interesting to discuss how Starfleet Command's other tests changed throughout the franchise. While later iterations of Star Trek didn't feature the Kobayashi Maru specifically, they did showcase other versions of a command test. In Star Trek The Next Generation, Deanna Troi was given a similar no-win scenario with her bridge officer's test. There, Troi repeatedly failed to save her ship, until she realized that the only way to succeed was to order her subordinate, in this case a holographic Geordi LaForge, to his death, in order to save the rest of the crew. Again, we see the idea of the needs of the many outweighing the needs of the few, yet this time, in distinct difference from Spock, the sacrifice was not one's own, but to understand that sometimes as a leader, you would be forced to have to make others make the sacrifice, and understand the weight of that decision. While Troi was horrified and angered by the solution, Commander Riker points out that this variation of the test was to make a leader understand the weight of responsibility they had towards the lives of the crew, but also understand that sometimes to win a no-win scenario doesn't feel like success.
When the moment came, I hesitated. Maybe you were right. Maybe I'm not cut out for this.
You did exactly what you had to do. You considered all your options. You tried every alternative, and then you made the hard choice.
But my favorite solution to the test appears only in the Star Trek New Frontier novels written by Peter David. There we learn that the protagonist Captain Calhoun actually beat the Kobayashi Maru test without cheating. This time by actually blowing up the civilian vessel himself, surprising the Klingons and thus allowing his crew time to escape them unharmed. While certainly a much more morally questionable and dubious solution, Calhoun's response actually resulted in the most lives ever saved in the test. And Calhoun justified his actions by arguing that it was clearly all a trap to begin with, and that the Maru's crew was probably already dead, and if they weren't, a quick death was preferable to Klingon capture anyways. Yet there was no way to know this. Nor was it perhaps Calhoun's place to make the choice between death and imprisonment for that crew, especially as they were not his direct responsibility, as they were not Starfleet officers. He doesn't get to make the choice for civilians whether they get to die or not. Yet while the crew of the Kobayashi Maru did all perish, none of Calhoun's crew were harmed. So in a roundabout way, it did highlight the ethos of the needs of the many over the few, though certainly in a way that Starfleet would hardly approve of. Because again, you see, it's all about making a choice, deciding something, and understanding that your choice has ramifications for other people. But again, this gets into that morally gray waters because historically many of our leaders in our country, well, the United States, my country, not necessarily your country today, sometimes choose the needs of the few over the needs of the many, or the needs of people that look like them or that they care about more over the needs of others. We see this in things with racial injustice, for example, where the needs of white people are often placed over the needs of people of color. Though there is one final on-screen variation on the test worth noting, that appeared in Star Trek Voyager's episode Learning Curve. In this version of the test, cadets are given a similar appearing scenario: save a civilian ship from the onslaught, this time by Romulans. However, this version of the test actually did have a correct solution: retreating and allowing the ship to be destroyed.
And have you reached a conclusion as to your error?
I thought I did everything I could. We were just outgunned.
I see. Did the possibility of retreat not occur to you?
Retreat?
I can't believe you'd say that. The strongest tactical move is always the one in which you will reap the highest gain at the lowest cost. Going out with phasers firing may seem heroic, but in the long run it is merely foolish. Retreat is often the best possible option.
Well, Mr. Tuvok, once more you've proven your point. We're just not Starfleet material.
This solution is similar in result and intention as Calhoun's, though with less direct blood on someone's hands. Calhoun's solution places more ethical responsibility on the captain, but the solution presented in Learning Curve, where you retreat and let the crew die, perhaps only allows someone to wash themselves of any responsibility for the situation, as opposed to Calhoun's understanding that there is no completely ethical way out of the confrontation, and so takes that weight of responsibility for others' deaths upon himself. Human beings tend to try to be an incredibly binary-oriented species, or at least our culture today that we built is an incredibly binary-oriented culture. When confronted with a situation, we often give ourselves only two ways forward. We tend to lean towards it has to be this thing or another thing, believing those to be the only ways to move. As a result, we begin to lose a sense of nuance, polarizing our decision-making to defend our decisions. Yet no-win scenarios force us to acknowledge that often there is no right or wrong answer, only differing answers with differing results and consequences. No-win scenarios provide a stark contrast, providing a backdrop that allows us to see the nuances in a more mundane, less high-stakes situation as well. Instead of seeing right or wrong, we must understand that everything comes with its own nuances, and nothing can ever provide a perfect answer. Real-world leaders can learn two major lessons from the Kobayashi Maru. The first is what I stated before, that there is no right or wrong answer to a situation, only shades of gray. The only important thing is weighing what is best for the most amount of people, which leads to the second lesson, the one that Starfleet and Star Trek has always tried to impart. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. When weighing decisions, we must directly confront the ramifications of our actions, and as leaders understand who is affected by the consequences of our choices. And the job of a leader is to understand that you hold the responsibility for others' lives in your hand, and take that responsibility seriously. That sometimes you need to make sacrifices yourself, or make sacrifices for a few people close to you, in order to do the most good for the most amount of people. Many leaders today are more interested in taking the needs of the few over the needs of the many. And unlike Kirk, who still thinks of others while doing so sometimes, even when ignoring the larger consequences of his actions, many today think only of themselves, and consequences be damned. But to paraphrase a certain captain, Star Trek has always dared us to be better.
Let me ask you something I think we all know the answer to. The test itself is a cheat, isn't it? You programmed it to be unwinnable.
Your argument precludes the possibility of a no-win scenario.
I don't believe in no-win scenarios.
Then not only did you violate the rules, you also failed to understand the principal lesson.
Please, enlighten me.
You of all people should know, Cadet Kirk. A captain cannot cheat death.
That's it for this video. Let me know what you think about the Kobayashi Maru down in the comments below. Did you agree with my analysis? I'd love to honestly hear and have a discussion about the Kobayashi Maru. And if you want more videos like this with discussions of how Star Trek and other geek culture topics can help us learn to be better humans, give my channel a subscribe, or if you want to even help me even more, that's a sentence, you can help me out over on Patreon. Every bit over there helps me pay the bills. They really, 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 really help me out. So please consider helping me out over on Patreon. Also, I do run a couple podcasts. I have Star Trek Behind the Lines, which is a Star Trek comedic RPG podcast that I do with a few other Trek tubers. And I also have What the Frau, which is a Farscape rewatch podcast, which I do with Council of Geeks, another LGBTQ geek YouTuber. But beyond all of that stuff, besides subscribing, commenting, listening to the podcast, help me out on Patreon, I'm just glad that you stopped by, and I hope that you, as always, live long and prosper. Patrons, you are my patrons. You are so awesome. So here are your names. Catherine Lambeth, Eli Berg Moss, Ashley Allen, Bo Kikio, Miranda Janelle, Ashlyn Solstice, Greg Gillum, Stephen Kleinard, Camille T, Randy Thompson, Stephen Schuhart, Boyd Earl, and Mary Beth Earl, Wellington Marcus, Wayne Twitchell, Rick Osborne, Roar, Ish the Mad, Piston Twisted Garage, Dominic Noble, Buttoneer, John Steele, Michael Beam, Gavin Robinson, Carmen Olson, William Stewart, Amanda Ronya, Hannah F., Nathan Olson, Andrew Jorgensen, BBD, Jason Knott, Maeve, saying it twice because I can, Andrew K., Bree Beecher, Jasmine, Nathan Steele, Skylar Gray, Lily, Tiffany Danger, Sean Piper, Wen Dizzle Bizzle, Bush, Jane Packard, Geek Filter, Mari Neckard, Jacob Tovar, Polymenia, Celestial Dawn, Jean Mithun, Sarah Bystam Din, Mark the Edge, Corey Honkanen, and Vale the Pale Dunn, Lysa, W. Randy Eady, Andrew Lamoureux, Zone 1 Librarian, and finally, Michael Hardy. I am sorry for that, but seriously, thank you so much, patrons. You really mean the world to me, and you really are changing my life, even if I may have changed your life for the worst with my singing. Thank you so much for all of your support.